Welcome to the On Labs podcast. Our special guest today is Adam Jacob. Adam, dude, thanks for finding some time. I imagine how busy you are with your new announcement, which we're going to get to. I mean, but actually, now that I've mentioned the new announcement, in case somebody doesn't know what I'm talking about, what am I talking about, Jake? Adam?
Well, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I am very busy, but uh, part of the job is having conversations with people about the things that you build. You know, you can build amazing things, but if you don't help people understand what they are, then no one else uses them. At which point, it's fun for yourself, but maybe not. Maybe not the business you hope for. Anyway, TLDR. I have a company. It's called System Initiative. And we think it's the future of how people are going to do DevOps automation. And we launched it maybe a couple weeks ago. And yeah, we're very stoked. We're really excited about it.
Sweet. Okay, I'd usually ask everybody to give me like the 2-minute spiel on what they're doing today, but we're going to use that as our 2-minute spiel. So, how
Sure.
long how long you been working on that? Have you been in silent mode, or
Mm.
I just hadn't heard
Um,
about it till it was ready?
Stealth. Yeah.
Stealth.
No, we were. So I've been working on it for about 5 years, which is an eternity in tech startups. And yeah, we open sourced it and started talking more about what we were building in public maybe a year ago. And then we're working on sort of polishing the different pieces so that it felt like it was powerful enough to solve a bunch of really complex problems. But you know, System Initiative is a really radical rethink of how we think about the primitives we use to build automation. So it took 5 years because it was legitimate new R&D. We weren't just looking at the status quo and being like, how could we make it a little bit better? We were asking questions like, well, but if we could build anything we wanted and it could feel however we wanted, what would we build and why would we build it that way? And then tried to figure out how to make the technology work, which was been incredibly fun and very rewarding, and also a little harrowing, you know, because like 5 years is an eternity in startup time.
A lot of things can happen in 5 years, like not even getting to the finish line to publish your work. So, I mean,
Yeah,
congrats on that. That's
thank you.
a huge effort. You know, if for the people that listen to my show regularly, they know ops is like the bane of my existence.
So
I
sorry.
just it's so tough for me. Everything is just so confusing, and the more configuration there is, the worse that gets for me. Um,
Yeah.
and and front end development just drives me crazy too. These are just two things that Node and
Yeah.
ops, and that's all I've been doing for the last like 3 weeks.
Is Node and Ops?
I've been doing ops work and mostly front end. In fact, my
Mm,
business partner was like, "Bill, you hate a lot of things lately." I said,
yeah.
"Yeah, because you've been making me do ops and front end work."
Yeah. You know, sometimes we call those things hell dives, you know, where you're just like, I'm just gonna have to just dive in here and just keep going till I get to the bottom and then slowly climb my way back.
Okay,
But
so
I love ops, and I've kind of gotten a shine for front end development, so you know we can have a whole thing.
yeah, well, I hope you love ops, considering like your head's been down in ops for the last
I mean, my head's been down in ops my whole life. It
forever.
feels like, you know, like I ran bullet boards when I was a kid because I liked ops. You know, like I like ops is the thing that I love. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about. We're gonna jump into the time machine, and we're gonna get a sense of how you got to where you are today. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the product, sort of at the end. So there's always a couple questions we start with here. The first one is, what year did you graduate high school, and where were you?
Yeah, okay. I graduated high school in 1996, and I was in Vancouver, Washington, which is sort of just north of Portland, Oregon, so just across the Columbia River from Portland, Oregon. And I grew up in the part of Vancouver where like the suburbs ended and the city begin and the country begins, you know? So there was like, you know, more like it gets pretty rural pretty fast. There's a lot of like logging and subsistence farming, and you know, not that I was doing any of those things, but those were the things that were sort of
Like
happening
like
where
like towns with like less than 10,000 people in it, kind of stuff.
yeah. I mean, Vancouver was a bigger town than that, but like, yeah, like I had classmates in high school who like had chainsaws in their trucks, and they were like because they were gonna go log a cut with their dad or whatever after school. Like it was, but also people like me who like were suburban kids who were on the edge of a big metropolitan area. So it was a bit of a mismatch.
Okay. Now, I don't want you to think too hard for this question. Just clear your mind. Very
Okay,
first
excited.
thought that pops in your head on you working on a computer, making it do something that you were just like, wow, about. First thought.
Yeah, the first time I dialed into a bulletin board,
How old were you? Tell me a little bit about that
8 or 9, something like that. And my mom's a real estate agent, and she bought a PC in order to. I'm terrible with dates and time,
That's
so
okay.
this is all accurate to some degree of approximation. Um, but she bought a computer because she was a real estate agent, and you could access the MLS over a bulletin board, the multiple listing service, which was quite an advantage, right? At the time, if you had
Wait,
electronic
wait.
access to the
You
MLS.
could do that in like 86,
Yes,
87. They
yes,
had the MLS on the bulletin board already?
yes. Yeah,
Wow.
amazing, right? So
Mm.
so having access to it at home was a big deal because you could do it from the office, right? You could like dial in from the office and get
Oh,
access to
yeah.
the bulletin board. But being able to do it at home was like a big leg up. And so she had bought this PC in order to do that, and then to build like banners and stuff for open houses and all of those sorts of things you used to do with like dot matrix printers and all of
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And yeah, my brother had friends who had computers and bulletin boards, and so he
Older,
showed
I
me.
imagine. Older.
Yeah, by a
Older
couple
than
of years.
you. Yeah, okay.
And so yeah, he showed me that you could like dial into a bulletin board and you could play door games. And the thing that really got me was FidoNet. So this idea that you could like trade messages with people, um, and like I loved role playing games. I loved D&D and like all of those things. And you could play by email. It wasn't email then; it was just play by mail. But like role playing games where people would like write short stories and then you would like react in your turn and they would like roll the dice and tell you what happened. And like as soon as I realized I could play and that people didn't know that I was a kid, I was like, this is the greatest. You know? like like I can hang out and play door games. I can like write short stories, like describing what my character would do, and role playing games. I can like, I was.
I guess it also I have few. I always have questions, but I guess it.
Yeah.
I had a couple. Well, let me start with this one first, and I'll probably forget the other one. But we'll keep. You must have had to compete for this computer at some point, and your mom must have told you 1,000 times, "Don't break it. I need it for
Yeah.
work."
Yeah, but then that's true. I remember very vividly she at some point told me that I should like stop using the computer because it was tired, and I was like, they do not get tired. And
I love
um,
that.
and and like part of it was that I'm allergic to everything. Not everything. I'm allergic to most like plants. If like the outside is a little hostile, and so like when I have asthma, and so when I was a kid, your dad would be like mow the lawn or whatever, and like I mowed the lawn twice. And the first time I mowed the lawn, like my entire face swelled up and my eyes were shut,
Oh
and
my
I
God.
it was bad. And then I recovered, and then they were like, let's give mowing the lawn another go. you know let's
Oh
try
my
one more
God.
time. And like of course it happens again. And so they were like, okay, maybe not the lawn. And so it's not like I loved being outside really anyway. And so yeah, it became just the thing I was doing all the time. And yeah, it became problematic. Like I started running bulletin boards not that long after that and figuring out how to do that. And then, I was using my allowance to pay my FidoNet dues, and then having FidoNet call the house at 2 in the morning, and it would be like one ring before it would pick up, and it would annoy my dad, and he didn't know what was happening until they figured
Oh
out
my
it took
God.
a long time. Like it was a thing, but I was obsessed. It was great. I'm still obsessed with it. Here we are on a podcast talking about the internet, and which is basically just an even better version of FidoNet, and like that's been the thing, you know.
But your brother didn't get consumed by it as much as you did then, so you had the free time.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, my brother liked being outside and like liked sports, and like there were lots of things he liked that I did not, that pulled him away from it. And then eventually I was like I like got a job and bought my own computers, and like, yeah.
Oh, so like in high school, you had a job, and eventually you just got your own system.
Yeah, I
Oh,
was like
wow. Yeah.
yeah, I was like a teenager. I got a job at a comic book and role playing game store, which was amazing. Basically, because I would hang out in it and sell comic books, and she was like, "Here's how the register works," um, and because people would just strangers would come in, and I'd be like, "You like comic books? I love comic books. You like role playing games? Let's talk about role playing games,"
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
like yeah, and eventually you sort of parlay some of your pay from selling comic books that I wasn't going to comic books, which was most of it was doing, like goes to computers.
Did you build your first computer? Because at the time, that's what we all did, right? Buy the motherboard,
No,
buy the memory, buy the.
I mean I did build it not long after, but that first computer we bought from like a Sears, you know, and then I expanded it. Like I bought components and
That
built
had to
it
be a
up.
DOS machine. That's the DOS.
Yeah, like
Just
it was
even.
like a
Yeah.
286,
Yeah, yeah,
something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, but did that feeling to, and you had it in your room, right? Like
In
that
the end,
feeling.
in the end, I did. Yeah, it was in the
So wait,
basement to begin with, but it didn't take long before I was like, maybe this
they didn't
belongs to
let you
me.
have it in your room originally, or
No, because
you were
originally it
just
was like the family computer from my mom. It was the like family computer, and
no,
then
but the one that you
eventually,
built. I mean, the one
oh
that you
yeah, the one I
bought.
built was in my
Yeah,
room, of
yeah,
course. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, 100%.
Uh,
And it was incredible, and
Oh,
the I had multiple phone lines in my room. I was running bulletin boards. My friends were dialing in, and then like when I was running Linux, that would so you could like reboot the system from the bulletin board, and it would reboot into Linux, and then you could dial in and then use the other line to get out on the internet. So my like friends in high school could dial in and like
so so
yeah.
that there alone is already a ton of ops with very little documentation anywhere to be found, right?
Yeah, I mean open source, right? So that was Linux was like I mean there was lots of you know bulletin boards had a lot of documentation. There was a lot of like sharing that was happening about how those things worked and sort of file sharing culture, and so like there was a lot of that. And then yeah, but what Linux was mind blowing for me because suddenly all the source code was there, and the documentation was there, and like man pages were like a revelation. And so suddenly it was like, oh no, there's this entire
Mm.
all the inner workings of how the system actually works that were a little opaque to me suddenly weren't. And so that really changed my life. Like it has set the open source and the ability to see those things and then to understand it and then to build the things that I wanted to build. Like that has been transformational for me my whole life. Still is.
So let's talk about high school then, because it seems like in high school you're spending time at the comic shop. You're not into sports. You can't really be outside anyway. Um,
Yeah,
what do you classes wise though? What are you? Do they have computer labs at that time in your?
they did. Yeah.
Nice.
And yeah, but mostly it was to teach people typing, right? So, uh, and I already could really type, so I was like a TA. And then I did a lot of theater. I did a ton of ridiculous amount of theater. I was not. I really liked high school. I had fun, but I was not a good student. I had a 1.66 GPA. I graduated high school because basically the librarian I would skip class and hang out in the library. And the librarian was like, "We're gonna figure. Let's like look at the. They still had like a array of law books, And she was like, "Let's look at the law and see if there's like a loophole to figure out how we can graduate you." And it turned out there was that you could like basically be concurrently enrolled in community college, and if you turned 18 and you were still in high school, then you could drop out with 6 months left to go. And they kind of froze your grades in time, and then they would remove all of the credits. But to graduate as an adult with an adult diploma from the community college, you needed like 40 less credits or whatever because all the vocational stuff was wiped out. And so I graduated from the community college instead of my actual high school.
Do you feel like looking back on it now, there was a lot more work than just going to class?
Yeah. Sorry, can I swear?
Yeah, you can swear.
Yeah. I mean, oh my god, right? Like it was I I'm annoyed at my own um hubris, I guess, but it wasn't just hubris, it was like what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe like self-absorption, but like, the part of you that I just wasn't interested and it didn't make sense to me and I was learning everything and you know but 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 something it just wasn't there. And yeah, it would have been dramatically less stressful to like, like it sucks to lie. And when you like are, when you're skipping class, and it's not like your parent, you come home and your parents like, how was school? And you were like, I didn't go. Like, like it's not like I was telling them I didn't go, And so you're sort of carrying around this little sack of fiction, you know? And yeah, no, it was awful. It was way better work to just do homework for a couple hours every day and move on with your life. I have this conversation with my daughter all the time, who, of her own volition, decided that she wanted to get straight A's and then did, which was incredible. But like, that is not me. Um, and and it's I feel lucky that other parts of my life I had good examples from my parents and other people to get a work ethic, because there's a version of that story where I also didn't wind up with a work ethic, and like that would have gone particularly poorly. But yeah, it would have been so much easier to just go to school.
But I find it interesting that the schools, I don't want to say gave up on you, but just stopped bothering you to go to class, just hang out in the
Oh,
library and
that's
stay out of
that's
trouble.
not that's not how that worked. So like, no, they were very bothered. They were bothered deeply by me, um, on many vectors. Like I would do just enough to be able to do theater, and then let my grades fall away because I had gone through the check, and I like I would they would like they built a computer lab at this vocational school and they put me in charge of it, and but then made me do all the same schoolwork as all the kids that were going to this vocational school for farming or whatever. And then they were awful to the kids who were farming, and so the thing you were supposed to do all year was write this paper that was intended to be this like glowing review of how incredible this vocational school was. And instead I just wrote this paper that was like, this is like a litany of all the ways that they were awful to these kids that they were teaching. I was like, this was terrifying. And then you had to turn it in every week, and so I've been turning it in every week like all year long. And then but they never read it until the very end, and they got
Oh my
very
God.
angry, and they called my mom and brought my mom in. And the worst thing they did was there was a girl who was pregnant at the beginning of this term, and he was giving this talk about what was going to happen, and they were like, well, do you you have to be here for the final or we'll fail you or whatever. And she was like, it's going to be tough because baby. And he was like, well, that's on you,
Wow.
and he failed her. And like she showed up every day, she did all the work. He failed that girl for nothing.
Wow.
And just out of pique, just because he was a dick. And yeah, so my mom showed up and read the paper. He like put it in front of her and was like, read this. And so she did. And then she was like, well, is it true? And he was like, what? She's like, well, did you fail him? Did you fail her? And he was like, I mean, yes, but she deserved it. And she was like, we're leaving. You're a jerk. And, like that led to like all kinds of problems. I had meetings with my teachers and all the vice principals. And like, I went to college for a minute because my high school history teacher was just so annoyed at the idea that like I wasn't going to go to college, that he was like, he made a deal with me. He was like, I'm going to find a college that'll take you and you agree you have to go. And I was
For
like,
what?
he was like, okay, sure. He found two actually. He found a small liberal arts college that would take me on a theater scholarship, even with my terrible grades because I had done so much and had done well. And then he found DeVry, which at the time there weren't a ton of DeVrys, and so I wound up going to DeVry in Phoenix for
So
like
that
a
was,
one semester.
so after high school, you went to Jurai. I
Yep,
remember that school. I graduated in 87. I remember the commercials for that. That was like one of the first ITT and
as
Jurai.
ITT and DeVry. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Pay to play technical schools, basically. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Some of the
yeah.
first ones that you did, I don't even know how many years you did, months or years there.
You did like 3 years or whatever, and then you got a degree that wasn't a CS degree. It was like a computer. It was like some kind of computer management degree. I don't know because I didn't finish. I was only there for like one. They did trimesters. I was there for one trimester, and I wound up with a job that paid more than the average degree graduate because the sort of internet happened. Uh,
Yeah, and you were already
and
trained for that.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, if you knew how modems worked and you could run big banks of them, and you knew how like, and you knew how Unix worked, basically, like you were in, and I knew all those things, and so I was off to the
So
races.
let me roll back a little bit. So it's time to graduate high school. You're
Sure.
absolutely not interested in school at all. Um,
I mean, I was deeply interested in school. I just wasn't doing any work.
okay, but I mean, but the idea of going to college seemed
Yeah.
foreign at that point. So
Yeah.
this history teacher cuts a deal with you to go to this school. But
Yeah.
what were you getting in return?
College. I mean,
Like you
an
get to
education,
graduate?
a way out. You know, like not that I was stuck. I didn't have a bad. It makes it sound like I had a bad child. I didn't have a bad child. I had a fantastic childhood. But like, um, yeah, no. I mean, it. I didn't. You know, when you think about like, what are you gonna do? Like, um, going to college seemed like a good idea. It's not like I wasn't smart or interested, and doing things that I wanted to do instead of things that you made me do sounded like a pretty good idea, which is sort of college's vibe, a little more than high school was. And like over the years, I took a little more. I like went to community college for a while and did some other things. And like I loved it. Like I actually really liked it. So yeah, but basically he was just like, I'm gonna figure this out for you, and then you're gonna do it because it's a crime that you're not going. And I was like, okay, let's do it, and we did. And I took my one of my best friends with me, who had graduated the year before and was basically just playing multi-user dungeons, and was like, "Hey man, we're going to DeVry." Because he also had been a bad student, and he was like, "Okay." And so like I went over his house, and he told his mom, and we got in the car and we drove off.
Wow, just packed some stuff and drove down to Phoenix.
Kinda, it was kind of like getting in the car, and then we drove to Phoenix. You know, it wasn't quite like that, but pretty much. It was like I called him and was like, "This is what's happening. You should come with me because you can't just stay at home and play
Oh,
muds
but
all day."
now you gotta find a place to live. You gotta like
Yeah, it was crazy.
ignorance is bliss, man.
It was so fun.
I
It was so fun. I met so many lovely friends.
So you did like one or whatever they call it, one
Trimester.
trimester there. But while you're going to that school, you probably feel a little bored because you knew all that stuff already, probably
I
in the
mean, no,
beginning.
because I was taking like, you have to take all the foundational classes still, right? So like I was still learning, like I was still taking, but yeah, the foundational computer science classes were not a big deal. But I was taking math and some of those things that like I hadn't, like when you're not a good student, they don't like keep letting you do math, like at some point when you fail algebra 2, they're like, okay, you're done now, you know? Um,
But how does
and
this job come across your desk in a
yeah,
sense?
um, I mean, part of it was I was looking for a job, so you move and you had enough money to like pay rent for like a month, but then you had to sort it out, and so I got a job. I had a job being the stage manager in a children's theater, um, which was kind of fun and a little depressing and didn't pay very well. And I kept looking for a job like on a help desk or as a systems administrator at an ISP. And I eventually found a job working for this ISP in like someone's garage, basically. Um, out incredibly smart guy, helped design the Iridium satellites at Motorola, and then had started this ISP in his garage, and uh, and he gave me. It was a funny interview actually. Uh, I came to his like side door of his garage, and he was like on the phone. He still had like phones with cords, and he was like yelling at someone. He was like, "No, no, listen, you're a dummy. Like I've tried to help you as much as I can. This isn't going to work out for you. You know, make a new decision." And slam down the phone and introduce himself to me, and it was like, "Hey, can you do customer support or whatever?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm better than you. Like I can raise the bar." He taught me how to program and more, and taught me how to and he taught me a ton about how to build those things.
How many customers at his peak did he have getting internet out
Oh,
of his garage?
maybe 50,000.
What?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
50,000 customers at some
yeah. I mean,
point?
eventually, and yeah, yeah. Because I mean, remember, this is like you're, the United States went from single digit percentage points of people with access to the internet to almost everyone having internet in a decade. Um, and that ramp was incredibly fast. And so like those mom and pop ISPs in that early part of the curve, they went crazy. It didn't stay in his garage, obviously. It grew out of his garage, it grew into data centers, like all of those things happened.
I was
But,
gonna say
you
because
know,
what is he running? T1s, T3s inside the
yeah,
garage?
there were no, yeah, T1s.
T1.
He had a T1 to his garage, and then we had a bunch of Sun boxes in the garage, and then we had, um, I was running Linux on a workstation, but it's mostly Solaris, you know? But we had like the mail server's hard drive was stapled to the wall, you know?
Oh, wait, but that's no different than today. Come on, Adam.
I mean, not really. It kind of isn't, which is funny. It's a weird superpower to remember that we built all that stuff because most people who've only ever used it, it feels like magic. And to me, it doesn't feel like magic at all. I'm like, we built all of it. Like we made choices, we decided, like we were wrong, but like everything that everybody sort of takes for granted as the way it must be, like it didn't have to be that way, like it's that way because we chose, and and you can unchoose. You can make different choices. You can do whatever you want. And it is a funny superpower to remember that we built it.
Dude, just this week I was telling somebody everything's running on rubber bands and bubble gum right now.
Hmm.
That's like the way it feels all the time.
Yeah, we used to talk about it as like there was like a witch in a coat closet that was just murdering birds, and that's how the internet worked. Anyway, it's
All right,
Halloween.
so you're working with this guy. I guess it was enough to say I don't need school anymore,
Yes, my
and you just
mom.
stopped
I
going to
wound up.
school.
Yeah, I mean, I had a conversation with my mom where I was like, I think I should stop because I'm making more money than the brochure tells me I'll make if I stick it out. And and she was like, well, you should go talk to the guidance counselor. And so I went to the guidance counselor and I was like, this is the job that I have. And they were like, are you a dummy? Like, you definitely should stop paying DeVry. You know, they were like, do not pass go, time to go.
Yeah.
And so I called my mom back and was like, the guidance counselor said I should quit. She was like, fine, fine, fine. You know, I finally got you doing good in school and now you're quit. Fine. You know?
So this is like end of 96, 97
Yeah.
when you do this. How long are you? I these ISPs disappeared as quickly as they appeared.
They
So
were done by 2001, right? So the beginning happened in what, 93, 94 of mom and pop ISPs, and then consolidation started in 98, and by 99, 2000, yeah, everybody was still on dial up, right? But the but the confluence of consolidation started to really push things together. So then you had like super regional ISPs, and then you wound up with a couple of big ones, and then people who had infrastructure that was pre-existing that could get higher bandwidth. So then you get the Comcasts and the AT&Ts, and sort of that stuff takes over. But yeah, I would say by the turn by 2000, you were most people's attention had turned away from getting people onto the internet, and instead you were focused more on they need things to do on the internet. So you've got like the Web 2.0. Well, that was Web 1.0, but like Web 2.0 was about to start. Middle 2000s, late 2000s.
how long were you with this guy in this ISP? A couple of years?
Couple of years. I mean, it feels like an eternity, but it's because I was young and it was so meaningful and I was learning so much. But yeah, it was probably a couple of years, and then I left and wound up working the power company in Arizona. Had an ISP, and their angle was that they had infrastructure all over the Southwest, actually, in places where like maybe phone lines didn't even exist or that kind of thing. And so we did a lot of bringing ISPs to very rural places in Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah.
You're
And like,
setting up like data centers at that point
yeah,
locally?
because the power company had POPs essentially for the power grid. And so we would piggyback on the POPs that they already had. And so, if you were in like Chinle, Arizona, like we were how you got access to the internet, and you probably didn't have any other, like you definitely didn't have another
Option.
option. But like there was no local phone call you could make, but we could piggyback on the infrastructure for the power company to sort of backhaul that stuff to Phoenix, right? So instead of needing like a local ISP or make a long distance call, which at the time was problematic, right? You could basically call us, and so we had a huge number of people, because we just basically ate all of the rural
What
places.
kind of equipment are you using at this time? Is there Cisco equipment here, or you're putting it together
Yeah,
yourself?
and oh, what was the name? I forget exactly who the manufacturer was that made the giant racks of modems that would fit in racks. But again, it was Solaris boxes, Linux, Red Hat. We converted that ISP away from Solaris and to Red Hat on like servers that we built by hand, um, in the late 90s, 98, 99. That was
What
one of
was
the
your
first.
primary role at that point? Was it setting up the machines and the software, or
Yeah, I was the systems administrator, and like senior systems administrator or whatever. But like, my job at that moment, like it was basically to just keep figuring out how to grow, make it get bigger in ways that people hadn't understood. So like, as consolidation happened, part of my job was to figure out like how do we acquire ISPs faster and then integrate them quicker so that we can sort of cut their cost. And so we figured out how to basically build a machine that ate ISPs, and then we would acquire them, and then within a day or two, we would have switched all of their infrastructure off and onto ours, right? And like, yeah, it was a fun time. It was crazy, We were all it was great.
I mean, there's no real tool. You're having to invent some tooling too, because not
Yeah,
everything's sitting next door to you. I mean,
no,
everything's out in the field.
and everything that you couldn't like buy a book and be like, how do you do this? Because the books were all about like setting up computer labs in universities, and they had good advice about running computer labs in universities. One hilarious one was there was like a security, in the systems administrator handbook that O'Reilly published, which I left that the Armadillo book. Um, there was a chapter on security, and part of the advice was that you could plug a line printer into the servers and then print out the syslog, and then you'd have a hard copy. And so if you got hacked and somebody tried to change the syslog, they would be able to deal with this hard copy. And we thought this was an ingenious idea, and so we like plugged the line printer into the servers, into a server, and then fed the network syslog back to them, and then had it print out the syslog, and then bailed. Like saw it like print out the first couple lines, and then we were like, whatever, went home and drank beer, and it was like connected to a lot of paper. And so then we came back into work the next day, and we had like completely exhausted the amount of paper, and it was like a gerbil lived in the data center. It was a
Oh my
complete
God.
disaster, but it was really funny. um don't do that. That's a bad idea.
Yeah, don't
um
don't.
but like, people tried all kinds. I wasn't the only one that tried that, I'm sure, right? She was very authoritative that this is like the bare minimum of what you should do, and clearly that was not correct, right? I mean, we discovered that about all this stuff, not just at ISPs, but like, load balancers and load balancing algorithms. And, the first load balancers were just round robin. And then we spent, there was years where everybody was convinced we were going to discover a better load balancing algorithm. And then it turns out there isn't one because all of the others fail in dramatically bad ways. And so load balancers are all round robin still, pretty much.
Here at Ardan Labs, we believe in empowering companies to reach their full potential through innovative technology solutions. Trusted by small startups and Fortune 500 companies alike, we specialize in high-performance software consulting, training, staffing, development, and now AI. With over 14 years of experience, Ardan Labs has trained over 30,000 engineers and served over 1,000 companies worldwide. Whether you're mastering Go, Rust, Kubernetes, Terraform, or blockchain, we're your strategic partner for performance-grade solutions. Let's elevate your tech journey together. Reach out to Ardan Labs today.
But I think the problem there is scale, right? So when I was developing in the 90s, the scale for the systems I was building was like maybe 10,000 users.
Totally.
So I could do extra logging, I could do extra stuff
Do
that
anything
I
you wanted.
cannot do today.
No. Yeah, and I mean, Facebook is really what changed that, right? Like, back in the day, like if you got slashed about it or whatever, that was a big deal. But, you know, when Facebook happened and suddenly you could have millions or tens of millions of people learning about something instantaneously and then just showing up, that that forever altered what it means to do work on the internet. And, I think it's no accident that sort of roughly along that same timeline is how we got cloud. Like part of if you were an operations person in that era, like, I had friends who launched the first Facebook app for sharing music. And it went crazy viral, huge deal. And they were literally like, they called us because we were consultants and we helped them figure out how to automate it. But then, we were literally just calling everyone we knew, being like, can we just buy the spare capacity? Like, well, we know you have servers and racks that aren't doing anything. Just like, we don't care what they are. We don't care what the form factor is. Like, we'll come pick them up in a U-Haul. Like, whatever you could do to like get that capacity online, you had to do, because there's no way that you could survive otherwise, and it was unheard of. And I think, today that's just a normal thing. Like, you make a TikTok video or whatever and it goes viral and billions of people see it and it's no big deal. But figuring out how to do all of those things was a lot.
I mean, it still happens today. One of my clients is Prediction Guard. We've been helping them build their infrastructure,
Yeah.
and we didn't realize the growth of users on the system last month, and suddenly our observability bill went to like $1,000, which I know doesn't sound a lot, but for us,
But if it was nothing,
yeah, it was when nothing to suddenly it was $1,000, and we were
yeah,
like, "What the heck's going on?" We didn't change anything. Yet the number of users changed,
yeah,
and suddenly now we're scrambling
right.
for.
Now you need sampling.
At this point, yeah, we're turning it all off, and now we're like, how do we turn this back on? But
Yeah.
it happens overnight, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you just don't know when that hockey stick's gonna go bop.
Yeah, and you
Everything
don't
you're
know,
doing.
like, when you think about how you design those systems, like observability is another great example. Like what you can do now, because computers have gotten so much faster with like dynamic tracing, and system initiative is a big complicated distributed system. We have, if I turn the debug level all the way down to trace, like, I have spans, hundreds of thousands of them in a single call, that like I can see what's happening in an async reactor. I can see, like, I can get a ridiculous amount of telemetry. And like, if I point that anywhere, it just falls over. Like, that's just not a thing, and we've done it, thanks Honeycomb for having burst protection. But like, every now and again, it's incredibly useful. But like, you couldn't do that 8 years ago, right? That was science fiction 8 years ago. And if you said that you wanted to, there's no way you could have. Like, the systems weren't fast enough. They didn't have enough memory. Like, they just didn't exist. The infrastructure to do it only existed in places like Facebook and Google, and now we have it. So I think, yeah, it's interesting how it moves.
Yeah, but think about, to your point, right? Because we were using hosted Grafana, all that
Yeah.
stuff, right? Which could handle the capacity. And so overnight now, because you have systems that can handle the capacity and not telling you necessarily right away that your growth, it's just, suddenly you got this cost.
Suddenly you got a bill
I
you
wish
didn't
it would
expect.
fail.
Yeah, maybe you do. I think it's interesting that, like, in a lot of those cases, yeah, we can talk about pricing and packaging, but like, I think it's an interesting pricing and packaging problem where, like, talking about Honeycomb for a second, like, I love that burst protection exists. And like, it's part of what makes the pricing and packaging mix for them so compelling, as opposed to like, a hosted Grafana that's going to scale for me, but I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm paying per unit, and like, the rate matters. And so like, there's a whole lot of like when you think about the business side of technology, I love that piece of it, because it's so interesting to watch how people connect the value that you receive. There is value in the fact that you got all those metrics as the user increased, but was it as much value as you'd hoped? You know, if you're going to go turn a bunch of metrics off, then the answer is no. Right? It was only valuable if you weren't looking. And now that you're looking, it was both overwhelming and expensive. And anyway, I just think that's such an interesting it's such an interesting business problem to try to find that perfect pricing and packaging mix.
Yeah.
Um,
We're having the discussions now, right? When it was free, it was brilliant. Now that
yeah,
it's costing some, just say real dollars, you start to question how
yeah.
how brilliant really is it, right?
Suddenly, its value is different.
Yeah. In the bigger scheme of things. But even as we say talk about maybe we should host our own systems, nothing's free, right? That
Right.
comes with a whole nother cost of
Absolutely.
resources, management. So, and I don't have any answers here because we're trying to figure it out. But
Yeah. Well, and people have forgotten in many cases what a lot of the foundational things are that would allow you to make different choices. So, there is a true thing about staffing. I mean, I'm not sure if people are going to see us on video or if they're only going to hear about us on audio, but like we both have beards. There's both plenty of gray in them. And like, we remember like if you asked me to set out that like build it with servers, I know how. Like I spent a lot of my life like figuring out how to do that and how to automate them, and like I know what to do. But most people don't. And so that we're in an interesting moment in the cycle where tons of people can create things on the internet. They can make viable content. They can build real businesses. They don't necessarily have to know too much about how the infrastructure functions. And yet, if the infrastructure is wrong, if it's slightly misaligned to their intent, it can become dramatically expensive. It can become inefficient. It can make the application break, right? All the things that you need to be able to do to fix it, they're still there. We've just sort of squeezed the toothpaste tube around. And it's interesting to see how now there is a class of people coming up who kind of I think have realized that there is actually magic in understanding how the underlying pieces of the system actually fit together, because they can use that to find like real new opportunity to create viable new things that you couldn't otherwise imagine. Like what kind of primitives you understand influence what you think is possible to build. And I'm seeing like a crop of younger folks who whether because of just their own interest or because they are smart, have figured some of that out and are sort of going a little backwards in terms of like, well, but do I actually want this layer of abstractions? Do I actually need all of these things, or do I want to build it this way because it's going to give me some asymmetric value at the other side?
now at least a couple of times this year, I've just looked at my business partner and said, I know we love Cloud Run and it's great. And I do. I love the Cloud Run and I love how easy
Yeah,
it is to deploy something. But
yeah,
every once in a while, I'm just like, can't we just go to Linode and just get a machine? And
you sure could.
like, what's stopping us from just
You know,
really simplifying it?
it's interesting. I think what's stopping you is that the R&D required to make that manageable stopped. And instead, it all went into, well, I'm going to build Cloud Run. I'm going to build Kubernetes. I'm going to build whatever the abstraction is. And then we'll just forget about all this muck, all this messy stuff under the hood. That was the premise.
But I
And
did it 10 years, as early as 10 years ago, Adam. I mean,
me too.
like for me to just run a container and give me a public IP address, and I know there's no extra redundancy and stuff, but not every system needs that, right? So my brain just says, why, so here's the argument my business partner will say,
Yeah.
because now you need to maintain that box and it appreciates. And then in 2 years, you're going to want a bigger box. And the cost isn't what you think it's going to be, Bill, in terms of saving.
Yeah. But this is a lie. This was a lie when the cloud providers told it to us, and they told it to us, and like it's manifestly untrue, right? It is not rocket scientry to even if you had to add in the headcount again for hiring systems administrators to do it professionally, you're still going to come out ahead budget wise. You're not doing it for cost savings. There's no version of this where there's cost savings. The only version of it where there's cost savings is willful ignorance. However, you cannot replace the fact that it is an order of magnitude faster to develop with those cloud resources, right? And the amount of automation that's required to get them going is minuscule. System Initiative is an incredibly complex distributed system. We vend it to you as a SaaS. It takes you 3 clicks to get started. If you wanted to run the System Initiative software, like, it's a lot, you know, like it's a humongous undertaking, and part of that's because when you think about running it on machines, the variability of those machines starts to creep back into the system. And we haven't spent any time in R&D even thinking about, like, what's the API? Like what you just described, I want to run a container on some compute. There's no API to manage the compute because the startups that for a second were like, hey, the future here is building a better operating system interface that takes a container and then runs it automatically and then, like, obviates the need to do patching and those sorts of things. They died because they got bought or they got murdered by Kubernetes. And so, like, there's an entire branch of R&D that just died. And not because it was bad or because it was wrong, but because we just decided as an industry we were going a different way. And that's what I mean when I say that there's this, like, interesting moment of opportunity where people who do understand how those systems work, like, we are starting to kind of shake off the rose-colored glasses just a little, because it is rosy. It's still better. So, like, if I sound like I'm a weird cloud Luddite, I'm not. Like I'm happily paying my AWS bill. I'm going to continue to pay it. Like, I know it's fantastic. And, like, we could clearly do a lot better on a bunch of vectors. You just have to have the will to do it, and the imagination to try. And for the most part, we haven't, because we've sort of, as an industry, decided that these other abstractions were going to take care of it, and now we're kind of learning that they're not. And, you know, so now we're going to have to go rediscover those branches of R&D that perhaps could have led to really viable answers, but that we stopped because some other thing won in the market.
And if we just add AI to that, then we win, right? So I need an AI-based operating system that can run containers on any machine I want, and I can tell it to do it with my voice.
I mean, it's the kind of pitch that gets you funded for sure. And I think, you know, but it's interesting. AI, right? If you look at it as a technology, like this is a place where it's, again, a superpower to remember that we built all this stuff. Like, it does behave like magic. And it is actually very strange and hard to sort of grok what's really happening. But once you start to understand it as technology and interact with it as technology, there is a bunch of really interesting things we can build. But it's not that the giant robot's going to replace software developers, it's going to replace engineers, it's going to replace operations, it's going to magically solve my container. Like, no, of course it will not. Like, it's like saying that, like, Elasticsearch is going to destroy Postgres. Like, I'm sure someone said that, you know, but they were wrong. And like, but as a technology, it opens up all sorts of interesting angles. So, like, you know, if part of what's holding you back from thinking about those branches of R&D is your ability to, like, translate a huge amount of information to another shape, like LLMs, it's a new day, you know? Like, when you compare what you had to do to write the code to translate one shape to another shape, and now you can just ask a machine to do it with some examples of the 2 shapes you want to come to and from, that's incredible, you know? But you have to think of it like technology as opposed to thinking of it like magic, right? And it's the same as people who look at, you know, who look at AWS and go, you could never possibly, like, save money by just running it on servers, because they've never run servers in their lives. They've never been in a data center. They don't know what it actually takes. They have no idea what it actually costs or what's even possible to do. And so to them, they're right. Right? From their perspective, they couldn't run that service in a good way. Now, you probably can, because you remember. but other people are starting to remember. Some of us who built it then, and people who are sort of coming up. And I think this moment is the beginning of a very exciting era, I think, across how we think about building cloud infrastructure and how we think about doing automation and how we think about DevOps and all of those things, because we've sort of reached we pushed the conclusions we started out on 15 or 20 years ago kind of to their logical ends. And it's hard to see how they get an order of magnitude better without pretty dramatic changes in how things work. And that to me is just like, it's this moment is as exciting as it was to figure out how we're going to get everybody on the internet, because we literally get to reinvent a bunch of stuff. Only now the technology landscape is so different than when we did it 15 or 20 years ago that what's possible is wild.
And the infrastructure around it is better too. And I mean,
So
yeah,
much better.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember a project that came across my desk in like 2000 and maybe 8, where we had to access retail stores POS systems
Mm-hmm.
and pull data out of their machines. Except some of these stores were in such rural areas that, like, even dial-up was over satellite. You couldn't count
Totally.
on it, right? So now you're adding complexity around batching the data. What if it fails? Try to get it again later. Like all this asynchronous stuff. Even
Mm-hmm.
in the early days with tablets that you can only plug in at home. Collect
Right.
all that data, plug it in when you get home, nurse, and let's pray that your dial-up's working tonight. Like,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we're not spending time dealing with those issues, so you get to add other complexities, I guess.
Yeah, you
You
do.
have time for that.
Because you have time for it, and the systems have changed. Like the design that we came up with for how to run like large scale internet services 20 years ago. Like, think about how much technology has changed in 20 years, but the shape, the like workflow, the basic way we think about the tools, unchanged. We've altered technology, right? You're not using CVS anymore, you're using Git. But the role Git plays in the stack, identical to CVS, right? You don't use Munin or Nagios anymore, but the role that the Grafana plays, the same. You know, you don't use you don't use Jenkins as much anymore. Some people still do. I'm sure the Jenkins people, if they hear this, will be like, plenty of people use Jenkins, but like, you know, but GitHub Actions basically the same. You know, and that workflow is ripe for disruption, right? Because it is unnecessary at this point, and it's what's holding us back. You were talking earlier about how you don't love ops. Like, I think you don't love ops because the workflow of operations. Like, the analogy I use sometimes is it's sort of like everybody's in a submarine, and you can only communicate by radio, and everything takes forever, and it like takes a long time to know if it's going to work, and then if it doesn't work, it takes forever to figure out why, and then it takes forever to see if it works again, and like that's just to get started. And then you layer in all the other stuff you need, like, well, I'm going to put it all through GitOps, and it's going to run through a pipeline, and now I've made those long feedback loops even longer, and like, ugh, like, it's not fun. And it works, which is incredible, because we built it because we needed it, and it's incredible that it works, and I'm very proud of it. And we obviously we can do better, right? And it's fascinating to me that sometimes I say that and people are like, no, we can't. They're like, no, I mean, no, you can't. Like, how could we possibly have a world where the infrastructure data doesn't live in Git? Like, they just can't see it. But like, I can see it because I remember when there wasn't a Git. And I'm like, no, it could be better. And that doesn't mean it's easy. It's not easy. Like, because there's a lot of things that Git gives us that is really important. And we can't lose those things while thinking about what it would be like if we didn't use Git specifically. So like, and it's a very interesting moment, I think.
Okay, we went off the side, which is good. I love these sidechain conversations. But you were about
Oh my
to
God, I
leave
was in
this.
college.
You were working for this guy in his garage that moved to
Yeah.
another facility. He had 50,000 people. Now
Sure.
it's probably 1998, 99. It's time to
Yeah.
move on.
Sure.
Like, where do you go from there?
I worked for a company called GST that doesn't exist anymore for a hot minute. Then I wound up working back at the ISP in Arizona, a different ISP in Arizona. And then um, and then I wound up moving to Seattle, and working for a chain of startups, like Web 1.0 startups, um, starting with GoToNet. And then GoToNet got bought by InfoSpace, and then the guys who started GoToNet started another company that was basically the same as GoToNet, only it was called Marchex. I think Marchex still exists and is a publicly traded company. And I was a systems administrator for them. So, and what was interesting about those companies is that there's tons of interesting stories because that was like another Wild West explosion era. Like Naveen Jain, who was the CEO of InfoSpace, is like a legendary crazy person, and like and I think criminal. Other people would say he's not a criminal. I'm sure if Naveen hears this, he'll be like, "I'm not a criminal," but like, he is a criminal.
Allegedly.
And yeah, an alleged criminal. Naveen James, he was a criminal. So like, you know, like there was a moment where InfoSpace had a bigger market cap than Microsoft. So, but you don't even remember who they are, and that was how crazy it was. And but what was interesting about it in terms of doing the work was, GoToNet and Marchex both had this same kind of model, which is they would sort of notice, they would pick a vertical like targeted advertising, for example, and they would buy like the 5, 6, 7, and 8 players in that vertical, and then consolidate them all together on the same infrastructure, which you can kind of see the line there from ISP consolidation. So it was basically the same problem, only it was with random technology. So what we did was we built these fully automated platforms for like eating people's applications that we didn't see or know. So they would buy a company, they'd send us in, we would learn how the technology worked. We'd have like a week to do it because, you just sold your plateaued startup and you're out. Like you didn't, like none of those people came to have jobs, right? And then, so we would have to figure out sort of how did this company work? How do you deploy the technology? Then deploy it on top of our infrastructure and then turn all their stuff off. And, the faster we could do it, the better off everyone was. And then, the profit margin on those businesses would spike like immediately, right? Because you had taken out a bunch of cost. And we got really good at it over the years. And so that was another place where sort of I'm so grateful for that experience, because what I got to see was just hundreds of different application architectures and different designs built by different people. Some of them were beautiful and elegant. Many of them were incredibly messy. But when you think about how to build that automation, you had to build automation that could accept all comers. And, it's a very similar shaped problem to what it looks like to build automation that works, in small startups, but also works for like, huge banks. Because you just have to you have to think in terms of primitives that you can use to compose solutions to the problem space. It was really, really a fun time. And a lot of the people who I worked with in that era, like went on to do interesting things. We were all great at it and we just didn't know because we worked together for the better part of a decade. And so like we knew that we liked each other, but like we didn't really have a way to like know, you had no real way to like know what the other people in the outside world were doing, till later.
So then what happens after all of that experience that you're getting? Because it sounds like all your experience is about getting systems running, integrating existing systems, having to learn architecture, config, like all that stuff.
Yeah.
And
so then the people I worked for, that same executive crew, I'd worked with them for a really long time. I hadn't made a whole lot of money in an era where lots of people were making a lot of money. I had some options that were finally above water, but I was on the blackout list because I had root access to the financial systems, but not like I was looking at the finance systems. I was just because I was on call if they went down. And I needed them to sign a piece of paper that said that it was okay for me to sell my minuscule number of shares. And they not only did they like, to their credit, I guess, they took the meeting, but then they immediately said no because it was inconvenient for them. And I was like, yeah, but you're like hella rich. And I was thinking I could have just like a snudge, And they were like, you are bothering us now. It's time for you to go. And so so they basically said no and kicked me out of their office. And I was for being a pain in their ass. And so I walked out and called my best friend, who had helped me build this ISP and was like, hey, you hate working at IBM. These people clearly don't love me. Like, let's start a consulting company and we'll go build fully automated infrastructures for startups. And I will go find us work. And when I have enough work, we'll all hire you and you can quit your job. And he was like, great. And so we started a consulting company and we did that and we were very successful at it.
What year was that? Like 2008, you think?
Yeah, maybe earlier.
Okay.
I'm bad at time.
Okay.
And but roughly, like a year or less before like S3 was created, right? So the era of Facebook and right near the beginning of Facebook apps, right? So like right in that zone. And so we were great at it. The fastest we ever did it was 24 hours, where you could just hire me and we would look at your application and then we would automate everything. So monitoring, trending, application deployment, backups, databases, yeah, access control, all of that stuff. We would just basically roll in this fleet of automation and it would just fully automate everything in a day. Which was great. So like the business model was like we would charge a bunch of money for that, then be super efficient, and then we would like manage everyone efficiently with all this automation. The problem was the tooling we were using didn't quite work at scale the way we hoped that it would, and we kept getting bigger and bigger clients because scale was now the thing everybody cared about, and so you started to see the flaws at scale. And so that led me to write this thing called Chef, which did configuration management and was written in Ruby and was very programmable and handled all these really large scale complex problems. And so then we stopped having a consulting company because I met Jesse Robbins, who was the former master of disaster at Amazon. And so my consulting partners plus Jesse then started a company called Opscode, which became Chef. And then Chef was a big deal. We had hundreds of people who worked for us. We had a really good run. We had a lovely open source community. It's still around. People use it all the time. It's still growing at a steady clip. It's owned by a company called Progress.
When I'm actually interested in this, you're doing hands-on stuff for companies. You're like you're in the pit, right?
Yeah.
Now you decide the tooling doesn't really exist that we need, and it's causing us pain. So we're going to build this tooling. But at that point, you're switching from being a consultant to a products company. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious how you started dog fooding your own stuff, because that's
I mean,
a big problem.
we started out not as a product company. Like I was solving it to solve my consulting company's problem, and it was going to be like our consulting company secret sauce or whatever. Jesse was the one who was like, product companies are the way. Like, let's go raise venture. Not that I didn't know that to do that, or I didn't want to raise venture capital. I did, but I was, my previous title was senior systems administrator. I ran a small consulting company. Like I didn't have the perfect resume to start a company. Jesse Robbins, on the other hand, absolutely did. He was the like master of disaster for Amazon.com. He invented Game Day. He was a firefighter. He was like, and incredibly gregarious in the best of ways. And like we were good partners in figuring out how to do this. And so it was Jesse who was like, I'm not going to join your rinky-dink consulting company, but we should take that product and turn ourselves into a product company. So we did. And we very successfully, Chef, Puppet, later Ansible, we were very disruptive to a very large industry, Blade Logic and Opsware, and there's a whole generation of software that we replaced basically. And then a lot of the ways that we replaced it live on. So like if you look at how like the design of stuff like Kubernetes and Terraform and those things, they're all of a piece. You can draw a line starting with Mark Burgess when he wrote CF Engine in '96, all the way through to those technologies, and we're a piece of that technological journey.
I was going to say, I remember maybe around 2010, 11, 12, 13, hearing about Chef and Puppet and these things, and working with clients that were using that sort of tech. But I don't hear these names anymore. Even the name Terraform, I vaguely hear anymore as well.
Yeah.
So is that just because Google's and Amazon's of the world have just kind of replaced it with UI?
I mean, no. I think Terraform, pretty popular. and Pulumi pretty popular. I would say I don't know what your business is and does, but like it may just be because the shape of what you do doesn't sort of lead you to need to. But like but they're definitely big deals. Chef still like powers a huge portion of the Fortune 500, right? Like if you have data centers and computers in them, configuration management's a really good idea. It didn't stop being a good idea because you think it would be better to run Kubernetes. Like it's still complicated and those systems will live forever and like it's a necessary technique. I think what they aren't is on the leading edge of that hype cycle anymore, and so if when you think about how technology lives and grows, like there's a lot of technology that people are buying a lot of and that's very successful as businesses and has a long legacy and will live for a very long time that most people don't think about because when you think about what's new or what's popular, that's not it, like and Chef saw this multiple times in Docker first, then Kubernetes, Ansible, like all those things were supposed to replace Chef. They didn't, right? But it doesn't matter if they did or they didn't. What matters is that they captured people's imagination, right? And so, what's capturing people's imaginations today is not configuration management from 20 years ago, which not surprising, like the that's a long time,
Yeah, no, it is a long
Yeah.
time. I'm I'm always I do a lot of software training in Go,
Yeah.
and I talk about legacy systems, and I say, like you want your legacy to be something where you still have some product or some code or something running somewhere that's making a difference by the time you retire, right? Like the worst thing you
Yeah.
could say to a software developer is, I hope when you retire, not a single line of code you've ever written over the last 30 years matters anymore.
Yeah, 100%. When I retire, there will still be people using Chef to solve very meaningful problems, and it will have made a real impact on how the world works. And most people will be like, I've never heard of it, and I don't know, and the people who do know, and like, I think when I think about legacy in terms of software, I always, I had the pleasure to through Chef and those years, like I spent a lot of time working in large enterprises where I basically just go run teams for a week or two and teach them how to like do not only Chef but like DevOps in general and sort of transform how they worked. It was so fun, and I kind of fell in love with those companies and with those people because it's they have so many complicated constraints. And the way I think about legacy software now is the things that run the world. Like like if your software should be so lucky as to become legacy software, what it means is you were so successful that it literally runs the universe. And like people sneer at like banks all the time. They're like, they're just such legacy. And I'm like, yeah, by legacy you mean the global economy. And like, what have you written? Like yeah, okay, sneer at it all you want. One of us wrote the software that runs the global economy, and the other one thinks Go is neat. I don't
No,
know.
no, I mean,
Like, come
I
on,
say to my students,
legacy
like,
all day.
I don't want my bank turning the AS400 off right now
I
because
don't.
I'm
I
going to
don't.
log in and I see a balance. But
Mm-hmm.
anytime I hear about a company looking to get off those systems,
Yes.
it scares the hell out of me.
Well, because as a piece of engineering, it's you have to put in a real investment to get to that shape. But like, there's a company right now, Tiger Beetle. They've built an incredible piece of software for doing distributed ledgers in banking. Like, you can't kill this thing. And they built this incredible demo where it's like playing a video game where like the little tiger beetles show up and you cause like all sorts of bad things to happen to them, and then they show you how the transactions reroute in this distributed system to ensure that they always converge on the correct answer regardless of the circumstances. And like, there's real business and real money to be made in the replacement of those systems. What you can't do is go into it with ego, thinking that those systems are simple and the people who built the original ones were dummies. They were not dummies. It was not simple. And that complexity is inherent in the problem, right? The complexity that you think you could take out, like you can't. Like it's often irreducible because it's inherent in the domain. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't solve for those same problems in different interesting ways that have better properties than the way we solved them 20 years ago. You 100% can. But you just can't pretend that it's trivial. And we do that all the time. Like, you hear people say that all the time in technology. Oh, that's so easy. And like, no, it's not. It's not. Like, it's actually really hard. And almost always it's really hard. And the number of things that are easy are quite small. And people are pretty bad at having the logical jump between like what might be what appears easy and then how it scales as things get more complicated. They tend to be like, this is why every couple of years we tell each other that it's all going to become a PaaS, right? And then no matter what kind of PaaS anyone builds, it never happens. Interesting, right? Because the supposition of PaaS is always, well, actually you don't need all this complexity. If we just narrow, you can have any color you want as long as it's black. And that'll be enough. And it's not enough. It's not enough. We know it's not. It's never going to be enough. Like, the complexity is where the value lives. Like, it's where the innovation lives. It's where all the interesting problems are. And so, you can't just say to someone, hey, this thing that you understand or you love that's really hard, that's trivial now. It's bullshit. People who say that, they just don't know. And eventually they'll learn. because it's a property of reality. It's not a point of view you can argue with,
I have one system I built. It's about 20 years old. That's still, I was shocked when I heard it was still running.
Yeah.
But there's a part of my brain, to finish this sort of conversation we're on, where I feel like somebody should seriously consider starting to get rid of that, because it's getting old. And
It's getting old.
who's
Yeah.
gonna like whoever's
Yeah.
maintaining it now? Great, thank you. I feel
Yeah.
that's the win that I have, not the fact that it's running, that I must have engineered it in a proper way that somebody is still today able to maintain it, right?
Absolutely.
But my brain just says somebody should be thinking about replacing it now. The longer you wait, the harder it's going to get.
Yeah, but on the flip side, the longer you wait, the better the technology landscape gets. And so the optionality for how you can replace it and the impact you can have goes up. So, it definitely gets harder because the people who understand how the original thing worked are no longer around, or they don't, or you can't even find somebody, like I wrote some pretty complicated systems in Perl that I know are still in use to deploy really large websites. I don't know who remembers how to do with that anymore. Like, you're definitely not picking up a Perl book when you come out of college. So like, you better be thinking about replacing it.
All right, let's talk about, we got like about 15, 20 minutes left.
Sure.
How do you transition from chef in this company into sort of the work you're doing now?
Yeah. So, I mean, I loved Chef, and I loved everything about that adventure and that journey and growing that company and the people I met and the companies that we helped. And it's very deeply meaningful for me. But it reached a point where we were 10 years in or so into sort of DevOps and digital transformation and all of those movements. And I had gone into enough of these large enterprises and learned enough about how to actually try to get teams to work in this really high performing way, to sort of collaborate together to deliver really complicated things on the internet in a way that felt good tens or hundreds or thousands of times a day. And I realized I was in a meeting with a large auto manufacturer, and their global CTO, because they have more than one CTO, asked me, like, here's this problem we have with automation in our manufacturing facilities. How do we solve it? And so I went to this whiteboard and I solved it. I drew the picture of how you would put all these systems together so they could deploy these mission critical systems into this factory at will. And when I turned around, he high-fived me. He was like, that was amazing. And normally, if you're like in a sales meeting and someone high-fives you, like, you feel really, really good inside, and I did not. I felt nothing. All I wanted to do was go home, And And it was because I knew that while what I had shown him on this whiteboard was true, their ability to do it wasn't high. It wasn't going to work. And not because it wouldn't work, it would, but because all of the details had to be perfect. If any of those details were wrong, the shape of how the technology forced you to work with the system was such that you were going to get punished in a way that would make the whole thing fall apart. And that this was basically inevitable because the number of things you had to get exactly right were just way too high, and you wouldn't do it. You were probably going to mess it up. And then we were going to show up in a year and you were going to be like, well, it mostly works, but this is a problem. And I'd be like, well, that's because this thing that you had to get perfect, you didn't get perfect. And they're like, well, we can't because the world. And you're like, oh, I know. And I just knew I was going to play myself on TV. And I didn't want to be a person who plays myself on TV, you know? And so I very slowly backed away. It took a year for me to transition away from Chef, and I transitioned onto just being on the board. And then we sold it to Progress. I took some time off. In between, I walked my daughter to school every day. I played Dark Souls, which was very hard but rewarding, and ran some role playing games for my friends. And then, with my friends Mahir and Alex, we started System Initiative because that question that was stuck in my brain of like having seen that it was a system design problem, it wasn't a tool problem, right? We didn't need a better Git. We didn't need a better Terraform. We didn't need a better Kubernetes. What we needed was a redesign of the foundational primitives so that we could redesign how the entire workflow worked. And that's what I wanted to build. And because I had been successful at Chef and had some reputation, there were people who were willing to go with me on that journey. And other people, Alex and Mahir as well, like wanted to go on that journey. They saw it like I saw it. It's not like I brought it to them and was like, here's what we should do, you know? Like all of us had seen this shape and we all agreed that that was true. You know, Sunil Dhaliwal at Amplify Ventures, and Ryan Floyd and a bunch of other people also kind of saw it. And so, you know, so we got the privilege to be able to actually go do that kind of R&D where we didn't know for sure what the right answer was, because that's a pretty big thing to say that what you're going to do is invent a new primitive that then will change how the workflow works forever. Like that's a big stretch. And so, you know, we had to start building prototypes, and we've built probably a dozen variations of how the world could be that eventually led to System Initiative.
All right. So knowing I'm not strong on the ops side, okay, though I have ops people around me. When I first saw that tweet, I don't know, it was a couple of weeks ago that you were announcing sort of the system.
Yeah.
And it was coming out. I jumped on the website and I started looking at it, and I sent it to a couple of the guys on my teams that also sort of do ops. And I had a hard time, and I think it's because of my ignorance on ops, really trying to looking at the screens that you had there and trying to figure out how does this really work? And two, how is it different than what I'm doing today?
Yeah. So let's start with how it really works. And then that's going to sort of lead you to how it's really different today. And I think it's going to be better that you don't have a long background in ops, because it's going to help you get there. So, but you also don't like front-end development, which is also a really good analogy. So let's start with a couple of basics. So if you think about just data and compute, right? So just that simple idea that you have data, information, and then you write programs that operate over the data, right? So the way that we have built infrastructure in particular, our core primitive for basically building all this automation has always been that we write programs first, and then the programs manipulate data outside of them. And that's actually the root cause of a lot of the organizational and workflow pain, because it turns out, especially with infrastructure, it's not code, it's information. Like we can see, like we know that like that EC2 instance you have, that server you have, it has observable properties. And if we start from the position of saying, let's look at those properties and model them in really high fidelity. So the same way that like tracing or those things can model things, like What if we modeled them in really high fidelity? The same way that like when you build a video game, you model like an actor in this 3D game, and then you reuse that model in a bunch of different scenarios, right? Um, and or if you do manufacturing, or you do digital twins. Like we no longer send people to the bottom of dangerous mines. We send robots that are digital twinned, right? You have a simulator. Formula One cars have simulators, right? That are really high fidelity. So that same idea. So we basically translated all this stuff into information. And then we made the information programmable. So we basically made it so you construct these models out of this graph of reactive functions. So when the information changes, you can have functions that will automatically recompute and then store their information in a different part of the graph. And so now you can think about using that primitive to model all of these interesting workflow problems. So for example, we built this multiplayer user interface on top of it that allows you to compose infrastructure by building a living architecture diagram and drawing edges between architecture components. But what's really happening under the hood is those lines are causing functions to be linked together. You're linking function inputs to function outputs, and then they're re-rolling the graph on demand. So to continue to talk about it as application developers, think about the way you model application deployment right now. You probably have a CD pipeline, right? Where like you have a CI process, you run tests, then you have a build process that produces an artifact, then you take that artifact and you put it into a CD pipeline, which then does something. Uploads the artifact somewhere, runs some servers, puts it in Kubernetes, whatever you do, right? And it's bing, 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 bing. Each one of those stages is defined mostly as code and is isolated from every other stage, right? I can't reuse the definition of what's inside the container inside the Kubernetes definition. I have to retype it, right? I have to say it again. I have to keep it in sync. So we extract it to a variable, right? Or we do whatever it is we try to do. In System Initiative, you could define that same workflow as a transformation over the data. So like, oh, I want to build my application. When? Every time that an external event fires. Great. So I take in that external event. What I'm going to do is fire this function every time it happens. That's going to create a build. The output of that build is going to be a reference to where you can find the artifact. And then that artifact is an input to the deployment process. And so what that'll do is run a function, which kicks off, which then transforms this information and runs this series of actions and allows you to see all of that in a simulation before it happens in the real world. Because we can take what would have been source control and we can move it into the database. And so you're forking not only the information, but also the code. And you can program it all together in real time. It's bananas cool. And also, it's going to take a minute for people to get there because it is actually this transformatively different primitive for reasoning about these systems, and we have to continue to build them and learn and put it all together. But like, it is dramatically easier to think about these problems. Here's another one. Let's say you want to be able to show real-time security posture and audit position across your enterprise. So the way you would do this now is kind of insane, right? Like you try to slurp up all this data about the side effects of what you do. But in System Initiative, the data's in the model already. So what you would do is write a reactive function that says, like, is this particular thing compliant or uncompliant? And then you would just run it every time the data changes. And you could do it when it changes hypothetically or when it changes in the real world. And it would give you a real-time view into what that is. It would just compute it as needed. And then you could build whatever interface you wanted on top of it, right? Because you have this real-time infrastructure that's computing these values, and all you have to do is display them. And so then you could think about building whole new interfaces to security and compliance and audit, right? That would be impossible to build without this fundamental primitive of this big hypergraph of functions.
So is the idea that you've built and hosted this system? I would log in, I'd give you credentials and things you need to access
Yeah.
whatever I have in the cloud. And then you would run, do you need to run agents and stuff anywhere, or you're able to just do it from?
Yeah. What turns out that if you start with infrastructure, so the first thing we're doing is automating infrastructure. So think Terraform, Pulumi, the CDK, that kind of level. And that's partly because you need all that data to do all the other cool stuff I was describing, right? If I have all that information, then you can do all this other really cool stuff with it. But it's also amazing for just doing that. So yeah, what you do is you log into System Initiative, and then you have this big list of assets, and you can use those assets to build like a living architecture. And then you can then program the system to be customized to your needs by like literally hitting a button, and then it is now you're writing TypeScript functions that are sitting on this big graph. And so you can extend the system on your own. So, early users needed to do things like use Fastly as their CDN, and we didn't have Fastly support. So they went and wrote Fastly assets, and they were done in a couple hours. And then now they can integrate Fastly and AWS, and it all just works, right? And then they could collaborate that back. They could contribute that back to us by just clicking a button and being like, hey, can you vet this code and then release it back to everybody? So pretty soon everybody will have access to Fastly because we'll make with the clicky and like release those things once we're sure that it works. So like
I was curious what language you were using. So TypeScript is what you're using to write.
Yeah, it's all written in type. The functions are written in TypeScript, which is controversial. I mean, every language choice is controversial, but like TypeScript, the thing about TypeScript is that it may not be most people's favorite language, but it's in everyone's stack. So, the odds that you have to have some TypeScript somewhere in your company, pretty high. And, if you chose Go or Python or any number of other things, like less so.
I don't understand. Again, I'm mostly back-end Go dev, right? I do some front end. I don't understand the hate on TypeScript. I mean,
I don't either.
Somebody already made a decision that JavaScript is going to live there. It wasn't my decision, but somebody made that decision, and you have to live with that. So TypeScript seems to be the best choice.
It is. Also, JavaScript, for as much as people don't like it, is a relentlessly pragmatic language. And when what you're doing is writing small functions that mostly transform data and then do other stuff, it's great at that. It just is. And plenty of people who have tried it in System Initiative have sort of been converted to yeah, okay, I get it. I see why TypeScript. Because it's pretty good. And it's very pragmatic, and you can do a lot really easily. Has a pretty good standard library. You sort of get it done.
Okay, so people can start playing with your tech.
Yeah.
Now. I wouldn't even say playing. They can actually start using it.
No, yeah, you can go run production infrastructure on it. It has a big free tier. The design is so that you can come and actually build real infrastructure with System Initiative and not have to think about paying for it.
Well, that was my next.
Until it gets.
That was my next thing. Pricing is a nightmare. Trying to figure out pricing. I'll tell you my 2 cents with pricing and all this stuff.
Hit me.
I hate anything that is variable in terms of pricing. I would rather pay you a little bit more every month
for predictability.
Knowing that it's going to be X amount every month and I can budget. Mm-hmm. And then we can maybe at the end of the year figure that out. But
we true up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we'll just start with it's very complicated. But, with System Initiative and sort of my experience at Chef taught me that it's very hard to figure out how to price and package things in a way that actually works, much less works for everybody. One size doesn't fit all. So that's why you see this proliferation of plans and enterprise and call me or whatever. But at the root, I think the trick to having great pricing and packaging is to figure out how to make it so what you are asking someone to pay for is directly connected to the value they receive on the other side. So, for example, if what you have to pay for is compute minutes, that's pretty abstract. And it's really hard to understand, how does what I do relate to compute minutes? And so you have to go through this very complex story. And then when we wind up negotiating the price, I'm trying to get you to negotiate with me on compute minutes, and you're trying to get me to negotiate with you on the value you're receiving. And so you have to figure out a way to say that the price you pay is directly connected to the actual perceived value that the user gets. And if you figure that out, now what we're negotiating about is the thing that you're paying me for valuable, right? How much do you value a compute minute? You don't. You have no idea. But you value the outcome of that minute. And so if we can figure out how to put a price on the outcome, then we can start to negotiate in good faith about like where the edge cases are. So an example of this in System Initiative is that like we're trying to charge you only for the resources that you actually manage in the real world. So like a lot of the existing tooling charges you for like how you structure the code. Like each declaration of code is what is the unit of billing, right? And I don't love that because like I shouldn't be able to refactor my code and change my bill. You know, like if they did the same thing, why do you care how I factored it? You know, so but there's some things that are really small that because of the way that the APIs are and because what we do is model them one to one, like the pricing can get weirdly pathological where it's like, well, AWS has you put in a new object for every line of every firewall rule. And like, I can't bill you for every line of every firewall rule. Like it's both annoying and insane. And so like, so now complexity starts to sort of creep back into the model because you're like, okay, like how do we solve that? But as long as the starting position of a company is that what they're doing is pricing it according to value, then those conversations are easy because when somebody comes to me and says this is a pathological problem with your billing model, there's no way I'm paying you that price for every line of every firewall rule. My reaction to that isn't trying to defend my unit of compute numbers. It's just to be like, yeah, you're right. That's insane. Like it's clearly there's clearly not enough value in that thing to pay that price. And now we just have to figure out how to solve it. Um, and so that's the magic sauce for thinking about pricing and packaging is like as long as you can make sure that you stay aligned on value, on like what value is, and that it's the value as perceived by the customer, not as perceived by me. You know, I think compute minutes are a perfect solution to this problem because it abstracts away all this messy gunk. But like you don't, you know? So yeah. But pricing's hard and we're still evolving. Like the whole product's evolving. It's a brand new compute primitive. The things we're gonna build on top of System Initiative are bonkers. And I can't wait to see what people build, but it's gonna take a minute, you know? You don't get to skip a step no matter who you are or how cool the technology is. So, you know, there's 2.5% of the market who's gonna see System Initiative and their brain's gonna click. And some of them are listening to this podcast and they're going to come look at it and they're going to be like, yes, that is the thing that I need. And then, you know, a year from now, that 2.5% is 8 or 10% or 20, you know, and then those people will be like, yes, this is what I need. And then next thing you know, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But today it doesn't have to find everyone. It just needs to find that 2.5%.
I just get nervous that if I wanted to try it and it's working for me and I start to integrate it and it's free and now it's integrated and now you want to charge me a lot of money.
Well, let's be clear. I'm going to charge you money. So, and I told you that up front because it's on the pricing page. So, and there's no way to use it from me without paying me money. So you're definitely going to pay me money if you get value out of it. And like the goal is to align the amount of money you pay with the actual value you receive. And so, you know, in those early pricing conversations and those early customer conversations, we're going to figure out what that thing is. I know what the model is because I know if I'm talking to you about the value of the things you actually manage and deploy, that we agree that that's valuable to you. And then what's left is us talking about the price because we have to figure out like, did I get the right number on the left? Are there cases where it's pathological and we have to remove it from the price? Like we got to work those edge cases out. And you only do that by like engaging with people as you go. But that's, you know, you just have to do the work together to figure it out. And it's a moment of trust. And, you know, in early companies, you know, you have to trust any early stage company that they'll do that with you. And that's one of the advantages you get out of working with early stage companies is that they can. Late stage companies, it's a lot harder, you know, when changing the price or talking about it requires refactoring your sales team's comp plans. Like it's a lot harder to negotiate those specifics. But small companies, you know, I'm still learning about pricing and packaging. I'm still figuring it out. So like now's a pretty good time if you're willing to, if you can take that kind of leap to do it because you can call me on the phone and I'm going to like sit with you and we're going to figure it out together. And because it's in both of our best interests that we do. And that's not true 5 years from now. You know, 5 years from now, it'll be a big company. It has a lot of revenue. Plenty of people are happy to pay for it. Even if you find a new pathological case, maybe we don't care. But today we really do.
So for the people listening to this or they see something on Twitter, like I'm curious, who do you think is the person that should be checking this out? If there's somebody listening, how do they know that they need this product?
That they're the one. Look, if
Yeah.
you're an innovative DevOps engineer, if you build infrastructure right now with Terraform or Pulumi or the CDK, and you believe that there's a better way to do this work, but you're not quite sure what it is, this is the thing for you. Like, I have the answer. And we have work to do. So like there's still features to add. There's still, there's still more to do to cover off on, like we're like this week we're adding like the basics of importing existing resources from the cloud. And we're adding like management functions that are like templates that also manage day 2 behavior. And we're adding like customized views. There's a ton that's coming. But that core primitive right now is great, and it's ready to replace a lot of what you do. And so those people are listening, and they're the ones who should come. And in not too long after that, like enough of those features will have been built on top of this primitive that the number of people for whom that resonates will just get bigger and bigger, because you'll have to use less and less imagination, right, to see how it's going to work when you get big, or how it's going to work as the team scales. Today, maybe it takes a little imagination, but tomorrow it won't. And so, those innovative builders who have that imagination and they're ready to go, like, it is fertile ground. All the software is open source. We hang out in Discord all day. It's super fun. Like, you can come and build that stuff with us and help define what it is and what it looks like. And also, we run System Initiative, our own production SaaS on System Initiative. Like, you can use it to run real infrastructure, to run real businesses. And you can do that today.
You answered 2 of my questions. One, I was asking if any of it was open sourced, and you said
all of it is. Every line of it.
If somebody is crazy enough, they could go and deploy their own. Well, see, here's my next question. You're using System Initiative to deploy System Initiative?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's great. Yeah. There's not a line of infrastructure as code in our entire stack. None.
Do you remember the moment that happened? Because I feel like that's a milestone for anything.
That was so sweet. That was so good. There's 2 really bright moments in System Initiative's evolution. The first one was, I was such a skeptic about whether or not it would be better to have a visual interface, like whether or not that living architecture diagram would actually be better. Because I really didn't think that it would, because the history of those tools in our space, I mean, let's just be honest, like they're always toys and they never work. And so I was just like, are we really going to be the people who figure this out? Like, it feels unlikely, And I remember when we finally got the system to work well enough that I was building it and using it on my own, like seeing if it would be better, and it was. And I timed myself doing some infrastructure work using an early version of System Initiative, and I timed myself doing it in infrastructure as code, and it was crazy how much faster I was. And my mother-in-law was like reading a book out on the deck, kind of outside my office, and I like whooped so loudly that it was like I had walked up behind her and said boo, like the blanket fell off and the cat went everywhere, and it was like a whole scene. So that's like stuck in my memory. And the other is that moment where we stood up System Initiative, and then one of the things about it is it's multiplayer. So it's like using Notion or Google Docs. So like it's not like one person builds the diagram and shares it with another. Like everyone logs in at once, and you can see everyone's cursor, and you can like collaboratively build this infrastructure. And like watching this team of people just build the infrastructure in real time from my own browser, watching them do it, and like not on Zoom. I mean, we were on Zoom, but only to talk. But everybody was just working in their own zone.
Wow.
I was like, like I hadn't worked that way since I was working at an ISP, was sitting next to my best friend. And I was like, I welled up a little, to be honest, because I was like, this is it. Like, because think about it. Think about the way people work right now inside all those huge enterprises. And in not that long, I'm going to bring them that. I'm going to be like, okay, but what if it worked like this? And you got all the stuff that you had before, only now you could do it in real time, and you could play with your friends, and you could and it could be better. And it's just, I'm so excited about it, because I'm like, it's real. And it sounds like science fiction. It's a little hard to describe. It's, it's like all that stuff's true. And like, it's the future. Like, it's the way.
I love to see the excitement. This last little, you telling that story was cool because I could see it in your, like, yeah, that was that moment, like
Yeah.
that you
It
dreamed
was
about 5 years ago. Just
I
like,
didn't even dream about it. I didn't even know it was possible 5 years before. It took years and years and years of R&D to discover that it was possible. We didn't even know it was possible until it was. And then we were like, "Oh." And then once it happens, it was so good and you could see it. And you're like, so many problems that, just, if you're listening and you're a doubter, like just think about redesigning some of your infrastructure on top of reactive functions. Just like do the thought experiment with a notebook and be like, well, okay, what if the fundamental primitive here was reactive to information changing? And suddenly so many things get easier. Like not like a little easier, they get incredibly easier. And like that that's another moment where when we saw that really work, where it was like, okay, and the first problem was it was just really slow and now it's really fast. And like and you have to then make it multiplayer and not have conflicts and like there's a huge amount of technology and system initiative, but it works and it's super cool.
so now I'm worried about, we're out of time, but I got to ask this question.
Yeah, please do.
I'm worried about the fat fingering of something because I feel like you've made it so easy and flexible to collaborate and make change. How are you protecting, like, how are you
Yeah,
protecting the person changing that firewall rule and
yeah, yeah,
bringing
yeah,
down everybody?
yeah. Okay, so check it out. so so you have to make a fork of the universe and let you work in a simulation. So what happens is you create a change set in system initiative, and that change set doesn't impact the real world at all. And you write functions that give you feedback about whether it's suitable. So for example, one way you can fail in AWS is you can run out of elastic IPs. So if you're building things that need public internet addresses, you only get a certain allotment of them in a given availability zone. And so it's very easy to like run out. And in system initiative, every time you use one, it checks. It's like, do you have any more available? And that little check, if it turns out red, the little component you put on this diagram turns red. And you're like, oh, what's happening? And then you go look at what it tells you, and you're like, oh, I've run out of elastic IPs. And luckily, the error message tells you what to do about it. And like, then you can just go fix it. And so you can see it in real time. So that feedback loop happens because you don't just interact directly with the world. That would be bananas. But instead, we give you the same kind of thing you get in version control, only we've given it to you on top of this reactive data platform. So you basically build a fork of all the data and all the code that goes with it. So like, let's say you're adding your own custom policy. So you want to, write a compliance rule. Like when you write that, you do it in a change set. So you can see across all the data in the workspace whether that thing is good or bad before you apply it to the real world and anybody else sees it. And then once you actually apply those change sets, this is also very cool. What happens is the changes to this underlying graph data model get streamed into every other open change set. So you basically get auto rebasing environments for free. So when those forks get applied to the real world, every open fork automatically updates to show you the state of reality as it is now, as opposed to how it was when you fork.
So you need intimate knowledge of these cloud environments. Are you,
Yeah.
which ones I'm imagining you're supporting the main
Yeah,
three.
right now it's primarily AWS. And
Okay.
one of the things we have to do is just increase that coverage. And we're increasing that coverage in a bunch of, there's like manual coverage we're increasing, but also like we've been playing around with like the newer AI models that have really big context windows are turning out to actually be quite good at digesting like here's how you build models in system initiative and then here's like a description of something in AWS and like take that description and create me a model. Like they're actually doing a pretty good job of it. So I think we're going to see kind of a jump there in coverage once we sort of fine tune that shape. That wasn't true 6 months ago, 8 months ago when I tried it because the context windows just weren't big enough, but they are now, and so I think it might accelerate kind of quickly, but we'll see.
I think if people attach themselves to this and you build a community, you're going to have coverage for all of this stuff. And the simulations are really interesting.
Yeah, and so the one of the things I love about System Initiative, the way that works is like you like basically click a beaker icon and it flips you to the UI that is the editor and allows you to then create those assets, modify existing ones, add new functions, enhance the model, add new actions you can take. You can do all of that stuff, and then there's a button to contribute it back that just you click it and it will send it to us, and then we'll vet it and then we'll republish it. So like that loop is really fast.
See, that's my next thing, the vetting, right?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, you've just opened up a whole world of now you have to validate that nobody's being evil.
Yeah. I mean, but that's true already. If you use a Terraform module or you use a Helm chart or you use a package on your operating system, if you're running Linux and you run a package, like you have no idea what's in that package. You don't know what it is, but you trust Debian or you trust Ubuntu or you trust Red Hat or you trust me. And so like, I think one thing we're doing that's different than sort of the approaches that started with Chef and Puppet and then Terraform and Pulumi have also sort of taken. They kind of run Wild West communities where it's just, there's like a forge and you publish your stuff to it and good luck. Our take here is that like we're going to put ourselves a little more in the center and do a little more active vetting of like how things work and how they're structured. It means we have to invest a little more in tools on our side, and then we got to figure out how to eventually open those tools up to the broader community. So the trusted community, one of the things you should be able to do as a community member is like become a trusted vetter, a trusted voice of like saying these things are good. And so like we have plans to do all of that over time.
So now I want you to go back to your history teacher and the librarian.
Yes.
And let them know that, what they did has helped you, right? Because
they know. I mean, well, the librarian knows. The history teacher unfortunately passed away, so he does not know. But he'd have been proud. He'd have been pleased. And like, I think he knew all along. The librarian 100% knows. She didn't stay a librarian very long because in some ways, I think you're maybe not a very good high school librarian if you like let me skip class and you're like pleased to see me and I hang out with you and we talk about like music and like she maybe wasn't like a super suited to being a high school librarian, but yeah, but she is a good friend.
No, but those are two people from that time period that you look fondly on that kind of, I think, gave you the mental positiveness to just
so many people
do what you had to be, who you had to be.
Yeah. And I think about this whole thing more like art than science. And like, if you want to build great art, like great products are great art. They're just functional art. And so if you can figure out how to hold them as art and love them like art, then they're both a lot easier to build. And people, they resonate better with people because, you don't like all art. Like some art's good for you, some art's not. That's fine. Same thing's true with products. I don't love Go, but that's not because I can't objectively tell you Go is good art. Go's good art, right? I don't like programming in it, but that's got nothing to do with whether it's good. Like it just happens. It just doesn't. It's not my taste.
It doesn't resonate with you. I say that to people all the time.
And it's okay that it doesn't resonate with you, because it resonates with other people. And I think like, part of that. It's a real gift to be able to do that work and to have had people in my life who encouraged me to do it and to think of it in that way. And it's more fun to do now than it was when I started because I have so much more skill and I have so much more expertise and I have there's so much more belief in the capacity of doing it because I have a little bit of a track record and those things have happened that I'm like allowed to do crazy things. And it's like such a blessing to be able to be like, well, yeah, no, what if we created a brand new primitive for automation that nobody'd ever seen before? And like, this is so fun. Like, if you can't tell, I'm having like the best time. And, you should come have a best time with us too, because it's really, really fun.
Are your parents still alive?
My mother is, yeah.
Mother. See, I'd love to go to Thanksgiving dinner and ask your mom.
Like what I do for a living?
What kept you up at night when Adam was in high school? I'd love to know if you always pray that your kids find something they're passionate about and mature enough to get there.
Yeah.
And I think you were probably a handful during that time. And it would be interesting
Yeah,
to
I
ask
mean,
that question.
I've asked that question, and I mean, her answer is that it's, I I I was never lacking for things I was passionate about, at computers, theater, like all those sorts of things, and so like she was pretty sure I was going to be okay, because like it's not like I had not found things that I loved, and the part of me that was like not getting good grades and was like writing snooty reports because the teacher was not good, like that was problematic. But, you know, um, but even amongst my peers, like, I was like, I didn't drink till I was 22, like, there's like, I was not a like, I wasn't like, it's not like I was off doing crazy shenanigans, So
Yeah,
like, I think
you weren't getting into real trouble. Like I
I
tell
was getting
that
into
to my
good trouble.
wife. Yeah, I tell my wife with the 17-year-old, I go, yeah, she does some dumb things every once in a while, but it's not like real trouble. There's nothing that
Right.
is concerning.
I think good trouble is actually healthy. Good trouble is good.
I
Good trouble is
agree.
fine. Get into a little good trouble. Like, you know, try not to get arrested. Although there's variations of getting arrested where I can think about it as good trouble, but like most of them aren't.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
All right, dude, we are way out of time, but I had to keep talking to you. So
Thank you. Well, and like edit it. Do what you want to do. It's all good.
okay. For anybody listening, and we'll get it in the show notes, if somebody wanted to reach out after listening to this and
Yeah,
ask you more questions, what's the best way?
yeah. Adam@systeminit.com. That's my email address. So you just email me. That would work. I'm on Twitter. Kind of refuse to call it X, although now I just called it X. So
I'm
maybe I
with
didn't
you,
refuse that
dude.
hard.
I refuse to
Um,
call it X. I'm
and
with
I'm
you.
Adam HJK on Twitter. I am also on Mastodon. I'm also on Blue Sky. I'm also on LinkedIn. So you can find me on all of those places. You can also probably the single best way to get in touch with me is to join the System Initiative Discord. We're there all the time. There's plenty of people there talking. We talk about not only System Initiative, but whatever. There's like off-topic channels where people are talking about whatever they want. So you can always reach us that way. And like, you know, we're here to help. We're here to like help people understand both how System Initiative works, but also your problems and like that interplay of understanding what challenges people have in their daily lives and whether this technology can help them. Like that's the thing we want most.
Brilliant. So now you know where to go. If you feel like even 1% feel like this is something that might make your life better, get it, reach out, get on that Discord.
Yeah.
So this is Adam Jacob and Bill Kennedy signing off from the Ardan Labs podcast, and we hope to hear from everybody again real soon.